Good afternoon, all. It is great to see many of you coming back fully fed. Normally people leave or get a nap in after the lunchtime slot. And really good to be in conversation, and I'm thrilled to be in conversation and joined by my esteemed panelists, Mr. Vuyo Ntoy, co-managing director at African Infrastructure Investment Managers and also one of our Operation Phumelela Steering Committee members, and Mr. Derek Msibi, CEO of Stanlib Asset Management, and also one of the Operation Phumelela workstream participants and leads. So it really is good to be on the stage today to discuss the progress that has been made. So last year we showcased very quickly, and I spoke much faster than I am now, about Operation Phumelela, and really the objective is a pivotal public-private sector initiative aimed at establishing and enhancing South Africa's financial centre competitiveness. Within that, the ambition was really to stack something up as government had put, for example, in Operation Vulindlela for structural reforms, but to take a sector-based approach and say within the financial sector, how can we proactively lead on, as Fundi had actually spoken earlier from the Reserve Bank, modular reforms that we can show meaningful change and that will enhance South Africa and in particular the capital markets reforms. 4 work streams were established, and the 4 work streams we've put up here are the non-ZAR funds. And Fatima, you had even mentioned earlier, how do we look at having non-ZAR listings and non-ZAR collateral? So really opening up our South African marketplace. We had a listed cost of capital work streams and then a non-listed cost of capital work stream. Those are the technical aspects, but we will go into a little bit more detail. It's been a year or just over a year in the making. We kicked off with a launch event in June last year, lots of work streams and back and forth leading up to that to put credible policy papers and suggestions through. We want to get an executable playbook, and hopefully next week at the budget speech, I'm speaking forward-looking, we will have some tangible direction in trajectory to start saying we can get this forward, moving forward. So we're looking forward to it. So over to our panelist. Maybe, we still want to embed exactly what we're doing in Operation Phumelela into the ecosystem. So maybe I can start with you, Vuyo, just to set the scene for our audience today in terms of those who are not familiar with the detail of the work streams and what we've been going through. What are some of the key objectives that Phumelela was trying to set out? And what do you think has been the progress and the momentum out of the initiative so far?
Okay, thanks, Valdine. I think at its core, Operation Phumelela is a public-private partnership, as you mentioned, and it has a single goal, a single urgent goal, which is securing South Africa's position as the leading financial hub in Africa. This is a position that I think anecdotally has been spoken about. Obviously, the JSE has, over the years, been the largest capital market on the continent. But the problem we're seeing at the moment is that this position is slipping. So new centers such as Mauritius, Casablanca, Kigali have been rising up in the rankings, and Joburg and Cape Town, for instance, have been falling. So as a result of this, we've come together with a view to assisting government and working alongside National Treasury and other policymakers, the Reserve Bank, etc., to come up with a set of interventions, not kind of deep structural interventions, but practical, quickly implemented interventions that can assist in bringing back a lot of what's currently being lost. So it's not just rankings; it's really kind of the loss of capital activity in South Africa. I mean, just looking at the delisting trend on the JSE, the dearth of capital for small and medium enterprises, we believe that an intervention that again kind of helps to cement the position of South Africa's financial hubs of Johannesburg and Cape Town as the leading hubs on the continent will go a great way towards driving a continued thriving financial sector, which will lead to high quality jobs and financial flows to help stem some of the problems we see in the country.
Great, thank you. And Derek, you key and critical as one of the big components of the industry and have been in the technical detail on the work stream. Can you highlight to us, just as opening comments, what do you see as some of the biggest opportunities with Operation Phumelela, especially from the asset allocation and liberalization perspective? And secondly, what do you see are the biggest gaps that Phumelela is trying to close?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think the first point to note is that South Africa is in a very privileged position in that we have got the biggest pool of savings in the African continent. Over 60% of savings in the African continent are actually in South Africa. And that gives us a great deal of opportunity to create a financial ecosystem in here rather than what's happening at the moment, which is that an increasing number of investment activities is actually going offshore. If you think about listing, for instance, a Eurobond, you can't list a Eurobond on the JSE, but anybody who wants to list a Eurobond has to go to Luxembourg, and there's a whole financial ecosystem that's been created around there. Lawyers, fund accountants, financial advisors, etc., etc. If we don't arrest that, our competitiveness and is our attraction as an investment destination on our own is going to slip. And we've seen that over the last 5-10 years, and particularly with the liberalization of investment activities in the fund management industry, where a lot more money is actually going offshore. I think over 40% of assets now in the pensions industry are invested offshore. It's great for the investors in that they've got diversification, but at the same time, it does raise the issue of why some of those activities should not take place in SA. And to me, that is a question we need to answer, which is how do we make South Africa the place where all of these activities are being executed from, rather than the money going offshore and being managed offshore, and all of the ancillary financial activities taken offshore. So part of the aspects of Operation Phumelela is exactly that, which is how do we ensure a lot more of the financial activities in the financial ecosystem? That's the first one. The second issue that we need to be aware of is that we can't look at Operation Phumelela as the private sector trying to do all of it on its own.
Yeah.
There are some policy, there are some long-standing issues around how money moves in and out of South Africa, which cause friction, which over the years are actually working against us. And therefore, we as practitioners need to alert the regulators and the policymakers that these aspects of, some of them which are vestiges of long-standing ways of how we had to deal in the old days about foreign exchange movements, are causing friction and actually causing us to lose, when in fact there's huge benefits to be gained by actually getting those removed. So there's a bit of a cost benefit that we need to inform the regulators that actually by ensuring some of these activities, we will end up better off, as opposed to their fear, which is we allow all of this, then the money goes offshore, and then we're worse off.
Yeah, and it's such an important point to get an understanding and an awareness through of what it actually costs the ecosystem. Yeah. Both in trade flows as well as in structures of what we could be attracting in terms of management of product or assets in South Africa. And I think one of the points that Fundi made on the earlier panel is that it's important when they get together as policymakers or regulators that they hear a collective voice. She did actually mention that point, because it helps them then streamline all the different elements of technical aspects they would need to get through to get the best picture effect. And I think Phumelela is really setting out with those objectives in the 4 work streams is to get this collective narrative of what is good in product or reform for the capital markets. And Vuyo, you have been also very closely working in many of the work streams and in the content at a collective level as a steering committee member. Specifically, the concept of this financial center that we're trying to improve for South Africa as a competitiveness lens, and then in terms of the technical work streams where we've got product, management, and reforms that enable the issuance and the management of these products in South Africa to grow our ecosystem. Can you unpack what this actually means in practice in terms of what are the friction elements we are looking to remove, and how does that impact us as an industry and collective?
Okay, so implications for the market is just in respect of listings, and one of the key interventions that the operation is looking to create is the ability to have non-ZAR listings. What does that mean? First, for listings, it means a deeper, more diverse JSE. So, for instance, an African mining company in the Copper Belt, which is looking for capital, or a tech company from Nairobi choosing to do their primary listing here in dollars, because we'll come here rather than go to other foreign markets because we've got the deepest pool of capital and the best ecosystem of analysts, lawyers, and bankers. So in terms of that broad ecosystem of financial services players and advisors, that's kind of a boost. From a flow of funds perspective, it means we become the hub for capital intermediation, for investment in the continent. So instead of capital flowing from New York to London to Mauritius before it reaches a project in Kenya, it can simply flow through Johannesburg. And this creates new kind of demand for products, from sophisticated derivatives to manage currency risk, to the use of patient capital funds, which we've proposed to unlock pension fund assets for infrastructure and unlisted SMEs. From a third perspective, and this is something that's close to me, from an infrastructure perspective, it means we can finally mobilize capital that's needed to fund this is an ever-changing number, but the 1.8 trillion deficit there is in just energy transition funding to close the infrastructure gap on the continent. So essentially a more efficient financial market lowers the cost of capital for the building of roads, ports, power station, and our continent's needs.
Good, thank you. And Derek, from the asset management industry, how do you see the agenda of Phumelela intersecting with the local savings and asset management industry across the board, retirement funds, CIS, multi-managers, and how we allocate capital? As Vuyo has mentioned, there's a whole lot of initiatives that we're trying to mobilize to, but how do you see this for our savings and investment industry in South Africa, especially when you bring in that lens of allocating offshore, allocating to private markets? What does Phumelela bring to the table to enable or unlock the channel of flows?
I think first and foremost, I think it's going to play to the strength of what's been created in South Africa. I want to emphasize that South Africa is in a very privileged position of having deep capital markets, a deep savings pool, but more even importantly, the skill set to be able to execute on investment. There isn't, you look at the number of CFAs, you look at the number of investment bankers, you look at the structuring capability, the legal capability that is resident in South Africa to be able to execute on whatever investment product you have. It's definitely unrivaled. I think it probably even places like London and New York, they're not too far ahead of where we are. And so we've got to figure out how do we play into that skill set, because one, it's certainly a lot cheaper than doing it offshore.
Yeah.
Okay, so the cost of raising money for investors, we should demonstrate that it's actually cheaper for us to do it here. And then secondly, the friction cost of people moving money in and out of the country is less than what it should be if they actually move the money offshore. So I think from an asset management industry, our big concern is if there's customer money, how do we reduce? We want the maximum money to go to the market to generate the return for the investor. We want to minimize the frictional cost of getting that money and then deploying it.
Yep.
That to us is nirvana. If we can do that, then we'll have a successful industry. So part of Operation Phumelela is identifying all of those frictional points and saying, okay, how do we then reduce those so that the end investor gets a better outcome? And because the end investor is getting a better outcome, our chances of all of us surviving, because we only survive in asset management to the extent that we're delivering the best outcomes for investors. If we don't do that, then we're all dead. Okay, so we are more focused on actually how do we reduce that and how do we make sure that the investor is getting the maximum outcome by reducing and eliminating a lot of those frictional costs. And fortunately for us, it's also to drive the issue of scale. It's quite clear that in the financial services industry, scale is a big differentiator. The more volume, the more activity you have in your market, the better the chances of actually lowering the costs of actually doing business in the financial sector. So we're going to be crowding in lots of volume into our market so that we can actually take out and reduce the overall cost of how we operate as a financial sector.
Great, thanks. In terms of, we have various stakeholders in the room, from banks, brokers, data providers, buy-side firms. We've got infrastructure providers building out for the continent. And one of the criticisms you often get is that you get these talk shops. So in your experience and what we've committed, a huge impairment for Phumelela was getting the work streams manned and tasked by people who had deep expertise, but that could also drive execution. So for you, from the year-to-date progress that we've put down as a foundational level for Phumelela, how do you see that this initiative keeps momentum and becomes a call to action for everybody in the room?
Yeah, I think that's kind of two things. I think in the first instance, kind of the progress to date, I think, has been largely the plumbing. So a lot of the hard work in terms of identifying exactly what those policy reforms look like, it's been done in the various work streams that have been created. Further to that, I think the idea is take advantage of quick wins. Yep. So out of the various work streams we have, 2 have been identified as those that can be implemented quite quickly. First, kind of the enabling of NANZAR listings and collateral, which would allow companies to list and instruments to be traded and settled in hard currencies like the dollar or euro. And the other one, which is linked to what Derek was speaking about a bit earlier, about enabling NANZAR fund management. I mean, there's so much of our domestic savings capital that gets managed by foreign entities, not for any reason other than the fact that our regulatory system does not allow for it. So essentially, because we're trying to be not a talk shop, but a partnership that can deliver on concrete technical reforms, the central unifying idea has been, the establishment of a synthetic financial center. It won't happen all at once, but we think that by focusing on kind of a pragmatic approach that looks to onshore what is currently offshore activity, using our savings, will be a critical feature of then growing our financial ecosystem further. In terms of, I suppose, the call to action, given the people we have in the room, I think again, it comes down to the unified voice. I think to the extent that members in this room can absorb what the work streams are, what the intentions are behind those work streams, take those on and champion them within their organizations so that it becomes a rallying cry, not just of the steering committee and the various work streams, but a broader corporate cry for reform so that we can get those changes kind of right at the top of the list for government. I think that will be very helpful. In any case, I think there's lots of progress and very hopeful that there are some pronouncements that we'll be very happy with at next week's budget.
And Derek, speaking on that note of optimism and hope of what will come next week, as the reforms move from this foundational phase, the building blocks phase, into policy pipeline, what indicators should we look at to measure the impact? Phumelela is largely correlated to moving that GDP number, but what do you think should be our Operation Phumelela indicators of success?
Yeah, look, first of all, I just want to make an overarching point, which is, the South African government is very fortunate in that whenever there's a crisis in this country of dealing with competitiveness, the private sector rolls its sleeves and gets stuck in. Whether it's Operation Phumelela or Phumelela, these are, look at the people who were involved there. You had treasurers in the banks, you had people in asset management or whatever, because our view is that some of these issues do border on being existential. And unfortunately, as South Africans, at times we only react when there's a crisis. South Africans are brilliant to, we tell them there's load shedding, there's going to be no water in Cape Town. They'll do what's necessary to do it. Whereas here we're trying to change their mindset, which is let's think about long term. So my view would be, what do I expect to change? The first one is a very clear direction coming from the policymakers in terms of the various policy pronouncements they make. So, we'll see what comes out in the budget next week and what sort of commitment comes through in terms of the various, whether it's the medium-term budget framework or the amendment to the Tax Act or what the SARB comes up with. All of those things, to me, that's what I'm looking for. Clear policy directions that these things are being considered or they're going to happen. That's the first one. The second one is really about, once we have that, let's start seeing some very clear activities. For instance, if you think about something like non-ZAR listing, if it's quite clear that that's going to happen, it would be nice to have a non-ZAR listing soon, okay? Because it will say, okay, now the policy framework that we've been crying for is finally in place, and here's an artifact that says that it can work. So that, to me, would be a clear deliverable of one of the key projects, whether it's a non-ZAR listing or a change in the collateral requirements, etc. That would be, I'd like to see one of those before the end of the year, to the extent that we get that response. Then I would say the third one is when you see what the news flow is. Okay, how much people are they talking? How much is the industry talking about this policy directions and policy initiatives? All of us, it should form headline news on an ongoing basis that we are implementing these changes in policy that are going to drive our competitiveness. When the president or whoever talks now, they've got to talk about Operation Phumelela as the demonstration that our policy is actually delivering on it. And we've got to have the same issue, which is top of mind of all the policymakers and certainly us as an industry as well.
Great, thanks. And Vuyo, as you mentioned, this has been tasked with a lot of deliberate effort and lots of work streams. One of the imperatives was to back all of the policy proposals with evidence, research-based evidence, to say why this would be beneficial for us as a country or what the opportunity cost for us as a capital markets would be if we don't get this right. We've spoken of many of the opportunity costs, whether it was changes to the Reg 28 environment, whether it was the loss of assets that had to go offshore, whether it was issuances of product, our own product, even our own sovereign issues in dollars and euros offshore that we could be mobilizing here. The next phase of Phumelela is also equally important. Do you want to just maybe speak to the participants in the room what the industry should do, post the announcements next year, what we're looking to get going in terms of work streams and activities to actually put this into an execution plan now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about, first of all, from an industry perspective, I think getting more volunteers to sit on the various kind of work stream committees that we have to assist with the technical work in that will be presented to government stakeholders for consideration. Again, the voice, as Derek mentioned earlier, making sure that these opportunities remain front of mind for the public from a news flow perspective. But I think also moving on to some of the other elements of what the operation is looking to achieve, particularly around private markets initiatives such as the reduction of the cost of capital for SMMEs, etc. I think that's kind of a strong next step and a place where I'll be focusing from a work stream perspective. There's lots of symbiotism between the listed market in the sense that the companies that we fund will probably be looking at the JSE for exits, etc. And so a thriving JSE is good for private markets, but I'm really looking forward to getting into the private markets and how regulations can be eased in order to create funding for SMMEs.
Good. Before we wrap up with concluding comments, I'm happy to open up to questions in the audience, and then we can just wrap up on our panel as well. Any questions? Any volunteer hands? Okay, I don't see any. Is that a question? Yes? Let's get a mic here in front. Or was it? I thought you had a question. Sorry.
Valdine, can I just make a comment? I think we need I know Rudy Dix was here this morning. I think we need a Rudy Dix for operational Phumelela. Our version of it. Who's going to be the person linked and sitting with all the policymakers, coordinating them and giving them sleepless nights about the delivery around Operation Phumelela, because that's the way things get done.
Yeah.
Is that you need an unrelenting person who is in everybody's face, who's always reminding them that they're deliverables, and coordinating the interface between the public and the private sector. And if there's one wish, for me, it would be really let's go find our own version in Operation Phumelela. I know Stuart is doing a great job in terms of being the voice of Operation Phumelela. But we need someone stuck into that machine, because working through that policy-making machine is a skill on its own, and requires a certain degree of political savvy to be able to navigate it.
Well, you preempted my last or concluding comment to say if you could leave the audience with one message, but I think it's a call for action for Phumelela committee as well. How to think about Operation Phumelela over the next year, and just for the audience and just to have visibility. I know we shared it last year, but Phumelela was a collective initiative. It is chaired by Leila Fourie from the JSE, and I will take over that chair when Leila leaves. Secretary, and there's quite a number of steering committee members across the industry. I think we've got 7 steering committee members in total across some of the banks, certainly from the fund management industry, from private equity industry, and as well as from the asset management industry. So it's quite a diverse group. And then Trutham is the secretariat. But what I'm hearing you say, Derek, is a Rudy, is an action point and an individual. And Vuyo, from yourself, what would you want to leave the audience with to say over the next 12 months? What would we like to see in terms of action and momentum from Phumelela?
Yeah, I think it's really about the short list, the 2 items, i.e. the NANZAR listings and collateral, as well as rules around NANZAR fund management in the country. I think if we can achieve those 2 in this short term, I think that would be, in fact, I think that's what we've set ourselves as a target for kind of the short to medium term. So if I can see progress starting next week with some announcement during the budget, and maybe the appointment of someone within government who can be an interloper for ourselves, Insa Rudy, to help crack the whip within the government in terms of coordination and getting things done, that would be a very good outcome.
I have some thoughts. Good. If there's no questions from the audience, happy to wrap up. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Vuyo, for your contribution in Phumelela as well as your participation today. Greatly appreciated. Thank you.